Hi, Burr. Welcome back.
Well, it's good to see you again. It's been a little while.
A few weeks, I think, right? So it's not like it was this year, I think.
It was a couple weeks ago.
Yeah,
We didn't quite get all the way to the AI topic.
but we started with the AI,
Well,
right?
at this point, AI is the only topic, right? Everything's about artificial intelligence in 2025.
Yeah, um, absolutely. We actually almost started with AI. I think we mentioned agents a little bit, and then stopped the show, stopped the recording. And I think you are also interested in AI and LLM, right?
Very much so. I've spent the last several months really digging into how would a developer build a large language model infused application.
Hmm.
And there is a ton of activity happening in the Java ecosystem in particular around LangChain4j as an example, and what we
Hmm.
see with Quarkus.
Hmm.
And that's very interesting research that's being done. But I'm also looking at it from a generic perspective, like even a Python user or a Java user, because you do see a lot of activity happening in the Python space in this category. And then how would that apply to the enterprise, right?
Hmm.
Like what are your typical enterprise use cases beyond just simple chatbot, right? We've all seen the chatbot. Is that enough? Is that it? Are we done? Can we check the AI box and move on?
Interesting you say this because I spend my time mostly in enterprise projects. So I know lots of larger companies, clients, and they ask me, okay, at least we have to think a little bit about LLMs, how we approach them, how to integrate them, what we do with them. They need at least a statement. Is it usable right now? Can we use Java and so forth? So this is the common story. And so I also spent, I think, more than a year for sure. Just thinking how to integrate enterprise application, Quarkus usually, because I think more than 90% of all my project is Quarkus right now. I think everything almost. And the question is now how to integrate Java, pure Java or Quarkus with LLMs through from the enterprise. So um, how we deal with it. So maybe I tell you what I think about this, and then you provide your thoughts. So we have discussion about that because we both spend some time thinking about this, right?
Well,
Um,
I think that would be very valuable just to kind of not debate it per se, but discuss it because I do think there's a lot of ambiguity out in the market right now, a
yeah.
lot of confusion,
Hmm.
and it's a complex space. A lot of people
Hmm.
don't really respect the fact how complex this is
Hmm.
because the non-deterministic large language model being mixed in with deterministic code just really
Hmm.
creates this whole new way of thinking about software development. That's how I see it.
Exactly. But so yeah, it is not deterministic, and I think the hallucinations will always be. This is the nature of the LLMs, and with guardrails. From my perspective, it looks like regular expressions trying to find the problematic words, and this happens in the gateway before the it hits the LLM. And maybe there we can reduce the problem a bit, but the LLMs are just right now trained to answer, and if they have, if there's not a lot material right now, they will try to answer something half reasonable, and this is where trouble starts. But let's assume they are working perfectly and they are not hallucinating. So for me, the LLMs. So first, in enterprise, I cannot imagine. Then lots of my clients right now are happy with the chat interface. Um, and why not? Because it is not a power user interface, and it never was. So what I think is, the more serious the application is, the more time pressure the users have, and just waiting until the chat says something is just waste of time. So what will happen in enterprise in the next month or years, that we will have a form-based applications, almost like JSF with predefined structure, and behind the scenes will generate a prompt. I think this is a more likely outcome because we have business processes, and if you have a business process already established, we already know what should happen in the enterprise, and just having an agent which is autonomous it maybe there are use cases for it, but it is too early, because I think the users right now would not even know how to do with it. And if you think about this, I use IDEs all the time, and even there, the agents are annoying. So I'm often too lazy, to have a chat with the agent. I would like to have a code completion, something like that. So it's even, in my case, I don't like agents, I have to say. What's your take on that?
Well, so I think maybe if we step back for a moment, the chatbot, I think, is one of those things that is both a blessing and a curse when it comes to what we might be doing with large language models. So everyone sees the concept of the chatbot, that conversational user experience, and they get really focused on that because, one, it's incredibly intoxicating. It is like, what? I can just talk to this thing and it gives me magical answers. So that's been a massive win for adoption of ChatGPT and the chat kind of interface. I don't have to have a developer build me a user experience with buttons and clicks and click this and click that and dialogue this and dialogue that. I can just ask for what I want and magical answers come back. So that's the win of the chat bot type experience. However, for the average enterprise developer who is mostly dealing with forms on a screen, right, where they build CRUD-based operations, create, read, update, and delete against a RESTful API and endpoint to a relational database, and that's what we do 80 to 90% of the time in traditional enterprises. How do I add a chatbot to that, right? It's like, I don't need a chatbot. I don't have unstructured data in that context. So that is, I think, the key element is traditional CRUD-based online transaction processing systems we've been doing for the last 30 to 40 years. Those stay as is. We're not asking for you to basically go in and add a debit or credit into a checking account or accounting system and use a large language model for that. That just works like it always has. But what we have now is unstructured data coming into our enterprises. So forget the structured data. Do all the structured data way we've always done structured data. What we have now is unstructured data in volume. We have all these support emails coming into our enterprises. We have text messages coming into our enterprises. We have voicemails coming into our enterprises. We have videos coming off YouTube or tweets coming off, X and LinkedIn posts. All that is unstructured data that's flowing into our enterprises. Now, how do we handle that? Or do we handle that? And historically, we just ignored it, right?
Yeah.
It's just a big pile of data we ignore.
But take, for instance, this podcast. So what I already did, I'm using, I think it's called Whisper, to have a transcription from voice to text. And this is unstructured data, highly unstructured, even with repetition and whatever. And what I did, I implemented a CLI, actually, which behind the scenes creates a prompt. But what I do, I just pass, the link to the transcription, and all these steps are already predefined. So there is a prompt behind the scenes, but I not write it over and over again. So this is what I meant is I think the power user would like to have a shortcut and not, chat have over and over again. Because if you ask a chatbot twice the same, I would expect, the third time that you get a shortcut or something, or even a word. If you would like to speak, go ahead. Then I would say, hey, chat, do one, and the chat already knows what to do, because it was it is always the case. And also, I would say we should not underestimate, how smart the business users are. So in some of my projects, they were Excel power users. They were highly efficient, and then they have no time, to have a discussion with a chat. So I think what I'm interested in is to use the power of the LLMs to understand unstructured data, but provide a structured interface to it.
I think that's a very fair point. Because the one thing I'll go back to, though, is there's no need to replace all the 50 years of technology we have today. In other words, if you love Salesforce.com and how that user experience looks, and you have muscle memory for the clicks involved to navigate Salesforce.com to get to your dashboard, your reports, your customer data, continue with that muscle memory. No one's asking you to unlearn anything, right? Just continue down that path. However, if you're a brand new user who you don't have Salesforce.com memorized, well, what if there's just a little chat interface where you just ask for what you want, right? And then it magically figures out how to get you the data that you want. And that's just step one. But it could be another step beyond that. If I actually make a really clever prompt that gets me the data I want, I might share it with my friends
Exactly.
right?
But then now we
And
have
then
the
it might
shortcut,
remember it.
Then you have a bookmark or shortcut. So
Right.
then we reuse the entire prompt, and the prompt is hidden behind something which provides me faster access to the prompt. I'm not interested, to repeat myself over and over again, or to write everything down and maintaining snippets in Apple Notes or something like this, right? So there should be a more powerful interface to the chatbots, more than a chat. I would say this could work, of course. Also, the interface could look different, but just chatting, I think it is not very productive.
I think there will be both users out there, meaning there'll be people who want the menu system that they're used to, and there'll be people who are like, I don't know this menu system. I don't even know if this data is in the system, but I'd like to try. I'd like to ask my question and see if the data can be found. And there will be developers out there who can build that dynamic backend, right? One that basically uses something like MCP and the tool invocation capability large language models have, certain models have, and then dynamically invoke tools against databases, dynamically invoke tools against APIs, and then hopefully gather the data that the user actually needs. So there'll be highly dynamic systems, and there'll be your traditional static systems, and something in between.
So how deal with it? I have build my own assistant with Java, of course. So I started with a prompt, but the prompt was already behind the scenes. So this was this system message basically. So I tried to put as much as possible to the system message, and my user prompt is highly specific. So I have lots of assistants which are pre-configured with the system message, and my user message is very short. So and this works, and I'm iterating on the system messages, or they're like a placeholders in the actual prompt, right? But we can go a step further. What the LLMs are actually understanding are embeddings. They don't care about the text. So what I expect in one point of time, instead of now repeating the text, we can provide embeddings, a vector which is not human readable, but is more compact and more expressive than the text behind. And I would say in 1 year, maybe the prompts are just number vectors which are highly reusable and can be shared between users.
I like that point you made about prompts, because I've been thinking a lot about what I'd call the developer journey in this process.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're a developer starting today and trying to understand what would you do with a large language model, right? You would start with, what are the possible use cases? What might I use this new tool for? And like I think we already said, unstructured data, right? So that it might be in-user entered structured data in the form of a chat like user experience, or it might be emails or voicemails or text messages that are come in somehow or another. It might even be documents shared with us via a business partner. Like if you're in the financial services world and the stock analysis world, they have a huge ingestion of news, right? They care about news because news can affect the stock price, right? There's a big fire that's burning in Mexico that's in one of your major plants in your supply chain. Well, stock price goes lower, but that news is unstructured. So maybe it's just news that's coming into your enterprise. So, I think a lot about that user journey though, right? So what are the use cases? What might I do? And then I'm very curious to know about the prompt, tools, RAG, retrieval augmented generation, right? And then start thinking about agentic style workflows that people are all excited about now. But what are those stages of evolution? What are those things that I have to learn and gain skill in and be pretty good at in order to make my AI-based application work pretty well?
So for me, the agentic workflows are just solutions to a problem or patterns, because I think it's a way harder to have one mighty agent, to define, and also it doesn't work very well. So my experience is the prompts has to be really focused and not too general. And what we can do is with the agentic workflows is they have a few highly specialized agents, and you provide to the agents like a microservice very much. So you provide to the agent, an expert knowledge, and this is like encapsulation. And like the orchestrator agent is able to talk to the other agents, and the other agents are basically tools or functions. So and then it's just maintainability, because for me it is easier to trace. I see, it's a data encapsulation. I can be more sure what is exposed, what is not exposed, and it's it's easier to to maintain the prompts.
Well, one thing I really think about again is that if I'm a newbie, if I'm starting from scratch, what do I have to go learn? Again, it's that prompt, right? And there's also something I've missed in earlier. It's the structured output. So
But
really,
using prompts or developing prompts, there's both.
both. You have to know that there's a thing called a prompt, and
Mhm.
it's expressed often in English, and it's non-deterministic, both the input and definitely the output. But even the input is non-deterministic. So how do you manage prompt and what's called prompt engineering, right? How do you deal with that thing called prompt? Because just by tweaking your prompt a little bit, you'll get vastly different results out of the back-end large language model.
Mhm.
And then there's the fact of which model do you pick, because every model you try will give you different results. And I don't just mean Llama versus Mistral versus Granite versus ChatGPT or Cloud. I mean, different versions of that model will give you different results and different parameter counts of that model.
Yeah.
Like if I try the 7 billion parameter versus the 30 billion parameter or 70 billion parameter, I get different results. So all that is part of the learning curve, right?
And temperature top P and top K as well, right? So
Yeah.
even this, yeah.
Yeah, you could spend a month just playing with models to figure out which one kind of sort of might meet your use case.
Mhm.
And then there's the structured output. That's a huge factor. You don't want random strings coming out. You want JSON or something coming out, right? Mostly it's JSON at this point.
Yeah.
There's the tool invocation. So you can augment its data, augment its understanding of the world via tool invocation. And then there's, retrieval augmented generation, right? Another way to talk to a vector database to augment that prompt and basically augment the results. So once you master all those basic skills, then agentic, when you actually talk to the hardcore agent people, they've already been through that initial learning curve, and all they're adding now is a for loop. If you, in other words, a very funny way they say it is, I added a loop. Now it's agentic.
Yeah.
Because what they found is, and as they've done a ton of studies on this, there's a ton of papers written on this concept. Instead of a single shot prompt answer, make it multi-shot, meaning try again. If you don't like the answer you received, ask again. And it turns out large language models tend to look at the previous answer they provided and improve upon it. And just the nature of how they work, right? So basically, they'll give you an immediate answer. But if you say, you know what, are you sure about that answer? It'll actually give you a better answer the second time around.
Yeah.
And if you actually ask it, well, what if you were an outside observer, an editor, let's say, or an analyst? Would you say that's a great answer? And it will give you an even better answer. So 3 times, asking the question 3 times makes for a vastly better answer, which is kind of unusual if you think about it from a traditional developer perspective. You don't ever call an API 3 times, right? But in this case, you would call a large language model 2 times, 3 times, maybe 5 times, as you basically try to isolate and get the best possible answer for your end user, right? For whomever you're sending that answer on to.
Yeah, you are right. But this is already an optimization, and the agentic workflows, what always involved is like, communication between agents. This is what I see. And this is necessary to have agent experts in a specific area, maybe even different models. It is also necessary from cost perspective, because there are right now cheaper models and more expensive ones, and not everything has to be done, by the mighty model. And on that note, what I think what the future will be, or already is called model distillation, that we can extract more specific knowledge from the mighty model and create a smaller, more dedicated model, because I don't think we need, in a specific enterprise use cases, the Claude 3.7 or 3.5, which knows everything. What we need is more specific models which do one thing very well, and they can run on smaller hardware even. This is what I think, because where now everyone is going, due to the smarter and smarter models. I mean, we don't need a model who can cite from the Bible, just to see whether there is a fraud going on the input parameters, right? So and this is what I don't understand, that everyone pushes towards AGI. And what we need in enterprise is fast, small model, which does one thing and very well, right?
No, I really like that point. And because I work for Red Hat as my day job, and I spend a lot of time thinking about things from an open source perspective. So I've actually spent a ton of time over the last couple of months just working with open small models, right? We're talking like Granite, Mistral, Llama, Quinn, and of course DeepSeek, which is the new uber cool one of the moment. But smaller models that can run on, let's say, a 4 GPU system. It's tough to get a model down to the size of a single GPU system, meaning by single GPU, I mean 24 gigs of VRAM. You really want more like the 96 gigs of VRAM to get a decent sized model. But here's the trick I'm trying to pull off right now. I'm going to assume the model has no good knowledge that I want other than it knows how to speak English really, really well. That's it. In other words, all it is a natural language processor. All it is an English in, English out. And it can basically take the English from the emails, the voicemails, the text messages that I'm receiving, the news that's coming in online, and it's going to put that in a structured format, the structured output idea. And it might be able to invoke tools based on what it finds and the patterns it sees there. It's like, oh, this is news. It says plants on fire. Let me invoke a tool that basically says, what do we do about that when the plant's on fire for this particular stock symbol? Okay, well, we basically lowered their stock price. So the tools, the retrieval augmented generation, right, that structured output, all those things complement just simply using the large language model as again, ignore its data set and just use it for its English capabilities or German capabilities or French capabilities or, pick your favorite language, but simply just use it as a natural language processor and nothing more. And therefore you can use smaller models because of that.
Yeah. Last year I was on a bank and they said, okay, they have no interest in LLMs. And what I did then, a small use case with basically JAX-RS endpoint and input. And the input was basic address, right? And what I did is I implemented bin validator or Hibernate validator behind the scenes and encapsulated LLM. So it was a smart validator with fraud detection built in. And this changed their mind completely. So even those small things, so your model is able, to understand unstructured language. And my was able to understand unstructured addresses, for instance, right? And could, for instance, investigate, is the address, is it already a fraud, or could actually, and rate it also, how probable is it that this is a real address or not? And this was very useful, but not far away what you did. And I think there are, or in one project, we had crazy complex configuration of products. And it was really hard to tell an expert whether the product is actually valid one or misconfigured. And it turned out that it was very easy for LLM, to find out whether it is misconfigured or not. And now it comes, even if it hallucinates, it only gave, hints to the expert. It say, okay, it is probable that this part of the product was misconfigured. And the expert could look at this, and if it was hallucination, who cares, right? But if it wasn't, it was a great help. So I think such use cases are perfect, but you don't need, the largest Claude or ChatGPT for it.
No, I love that particular example. That concept of having the human in the loop, right? It's the phrase.
Yeah, always. Yeah.
So you can always have a human in the loop in most of your use cases if you choose to. There can be things that operate in the batch or background, like an email-based router. Like we receive emails into our corporation, and some of them basically say, look, I'm having trouble with my password. I can't log into the website. Well, we route that to an appropriate location. Some might say, I lost my invoice. Could you resend me my invoice? Some say, look, I bought your product. I'm having this technical problem with it. I can't install it. I can't use it. But again, you want those to go to different teams in the enterprise. And, but you still put the human in the loop. It's just a routing solution. And then a human pops up and says, reset password. Now, one thing that's kind of nice about this, if you are thinking in terms of iteration and you are that AI engineer, that developer who's building the system, you can improve upon that over time. While if it's just a password reset, today I need to get a human to look at it and go, yep, password reset. I go click these buttons on these screens, click, 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 reset the user's password. But in the future, if I have an API for password reset, I can make that a tool invocation to the large language model-based application. It goes, oh, password reset? Let's just reset the password, and then it does it automatically. And now you're talking about autonomous, right? That's the key phrase in the agentic world. It's like, oh, it did it automatically. Now we have an agent, right, that basically does that sort of thing. So I think if you're moving along the learning curve of these technologies and understanding things like structured output and tools, retrieval augmented generation, and that concept of putting it in a loop, then moving over into the agentic space is actually relatively easy. But I do see a lot of people are trying to get directly into agents, and therefore not learning all those basic things, those basic building blocks, and that presents a problem.
What's interesting, your use cases were boring stuff which can be completely automated with LLMs, right? Like password reset or whatever. In my use cases were more like we could either build a crazy complex system and hope it will work, or we just pick LLM which supports experts right now, and we have a huge added value with almost no costs, right, and more fun. And I think both cases are very valid, and the agentic UI is a complete different category of applications. So we could build something completely new with new user interface, and what we had so far was just increasing the productivity, basically, right? From and making boring stuff go away. Actually, eliminating boring stuff. Mm-hmm.
Not only boring stuff go away, but what I've heard this in actually a few different podcasts and different videos and things that I've studied and listened to, because people have a great concern that they've raised. Well, won't this new large language model, won't this new AI capability mean the employer will have less employees, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're going to have fewer customer support people in the future because these AI agents can answer all the customer support questions.
Mm-hmm.
And what I see coming out of the bigger employers in particular is they're not lowering headcount, right? Mm-hmm. They're simply moving headcount. Mm-hmm. Okay, maybe we do have the ability to make our customer service reps that much more empowered. They can answer 12 times as many user questions as they ever could before because of these technologies. Therefore, they're so hyper productive. They don't have to be customer support reps anymore. They don't have to do the boring work anymore. They can go on and do value added things like research, analysis, maybe sales, maybe something else completely different, but they don't have to do the grunt work any longer. So I do look at it from those kinds of use cases also. Where are we automating things that we never would have automated before? Mm-hmm. And in many enterprises, they just didn't solve this riddle before, especially when it came to unstructured data. They just left it sitting on a drive someplace. They knew they never had enough people to ever go look at it. But maybe now they can go look at it, especially with a real-time streaming type system. Let's say it's a Kafka-based system where we literally are ingesting unstructured data through this Kafka-based topic. But I can actually easily add a topic consumer on there that basically says, oh, let me look at that unstructured data. Let me try to make it structured. Let me see, oh, it's actually a customer support request or some other thing, and then route it accordingly, right? So I think in a lot of cases, we just have never had humans or systems that try to deal with these types of use cases.
Yeah. Another use case we had, also interesting, was actually two very similar use cases, but complete different categories. So the first one, we had a data lake and with APIs and SQL, and LLMs are very good at SQL. Mm-hmm. And we said, okay, this is the set of APIs, and we expose it to the LLM. And the business people could, say what they would like to have, and we generated the application. But the application with unit tests was handed over to the developer, and the developer took a look at this. Okay, could it work or not? And it used, the prompt as a Java doc, basically, put on Java. This was the documentation, and this was the iteration, and this worked surprisingly well. The code was clean. The developer did, it was still ownership of the developer. But this was actually a very good communication with the business department because there was no friction between. They could the business people just wrote what they wanted to have. The code was generated, and the code accessed the already existing data lake APIs from the company. It was on premise. Even OpenShift was involved, and this was actually the loop. It worked perfectly.
I've been wondering about BDD lately. Think Cucumber and behavior-driven development, right? It seems like it could have a renaissance here. Because one of the primary ways you saw Cucumber and Gherkin back in the day was, right, the business team could basically say what they want the system to do in English-like syntax, still semi-structured, not fully unstructured as English is, but not structured like Java is, semi-structured language. And then you could use that as test cases that test against the APIs that get created. Mm-hmm. But I haven't seen is anybody in that world talking about it from a large language model perspective.
But even better, not BDD, there was the testing with the wikis. there was the wiki engine created by, I think, Uncle Bob, wasn't he? Or Robert C. Martin. He created a wiki, and from the wiki there were text fixtures. Every row was a data transfer object, was passed to Java. You remember that?
I don't know if I remember that one. It's been a long time.
It is a long time. It was 2003-4 testing. It was. I will have to find it. It was very famous, actually.
But don't you think with large language models now we had an opportunity to make that system really work
Fitness.
well? Fitness. Oh yeah, I do remember fitness. Yes.
Yeah, and fitness is similar to what you said with Cucumber or Gherkin, but we had good experience with the table format. Actually, it looked like Excel, and actually, fitness was based on Fit, and Fit was Excel parser. And I think, back then, we had a great success with the Excel. So the business people provide us Excel. And if you think about this, I mean, for LLM, it's also great input, right? So there's lots of examples from my Excel sheet.
Right.
Yeah, so it could also work.
But but I was reacting to what you said about the business people could define what they wanted, and then it would go to the developer, including with the generated SQL, right? I think there's a huge opportunity in this one space where the business people could articulate what they want. And even if their English is kind of messy, that's okay. The large language model can handle that better.
Yeah.
And that still communicates better to what would be a test-driven development type set of workflows, right? Or BDD style workflows. Because then the developer's like, okay, I now know what they want more. And I can basically incorporate how that interacts with my API or the application I'm creating or whatever it might be. And then if you go fully agentic, you might even have a QA analyst agent that's actually reviewing, right, what the input was, what the system does, and the output of that system, and going, yep, this is not quite right? The inputs came in, but the outputs aren't quite the way we want them. And that iteration loop that those two agents are going through are kind of where it gets to be agentic.
So the challenge will be to find the right assertions from the beginning. Then we could do this, right? Because then the QA agent knows how to validate, because the QA agent cannot just think. Imagine the validations, then a hallucination can happen again. So it would be great if the business people could say, okay, this is the test case, right? So if it works and I formulate this query, I expect this result, and this should be taken as the QA input, this could work. But this is maybe more challenging for the business users. It's not always easy, to find the right test cases, I would say, for the business.
Yeah, because they're using their imagination also. They're trying to think through the primary happy paths. They're trying to think through edge cases, hopefully, right? And often that's what burns us in software development, right? We didn't think through all the edge cases. We didn't think through the non-happy paths. Who knew the user could throw in this random thing? Oh my God. Yeah.
And another complete different company, another use case was, but similar. So we had a kind of a plugin system, and it was an old system. And in a new system, what we said, okay, the plugin is just, nothing else than orchestration of existing APIs, and the APIs were Java interfaces. And and what we could do is we could reconfigure the plugins at runtime, which make the system complex. And I said, okay, let's learn from Quarkus. There's no reconfiguration at runtime, so we could generate code at build time. But now we know how to generate the code efficiently. And then we got the idea, almost the same idea with the business. The business expert formulates what to do. The LLM gets, our interfaces as input in the prompt. So, okay, this is what you should call, and you should write unit tests for it. And the code was generated for us. And again, a developer did a QA. It worked, 90% of the time or even higher. So it was surprisingly good. The code was clean, and it worked perfectly because the prompt was the documentation. And if something didn't work, if the business people were not happy, so we reiterated, so no problem at all, right? But this is the beginning, but there was already added value there.
What's funny about what we're talking about right now is there are the tools that impact the developer's workflow, and there are the tools that impact the business user's workflow.
Yeah.
Right? And that business user might be a business analyst who's helping build the system, or maybe truly the business user, like the the nurse, the lawyer, the accountant, right, the marketing executive, that
Mhm.
true end user of the application that we're creating. And the opportunity here is quite vast, right? In other words, we
Yes.
can have a tool that simply helps me build better unit tests as a developer, or help do better CI as a developer, or
Mhm.
simply give me tutorials on some framework or technology I didn't know yet.
Mhm.
Like I was asking, what was I doing recently? I was asking ChatGPT to give me a little bit of information about Milvus. I've not used the vector database called Milvus, so I was like, hey, give me a little tutorial on Milvus. And of course, it starts giving you that information, which is pretty powerful. So that having that AI-based tutor is a win for me as a developer who's trying to figure out a new technology. But there's also if you think about it, the tools the business user wants, they want the same kind of thing, right? They want to have their own interactive tutors. They want to have their own interactive chatbot / agent type assistants that can help them solve whatever business problem they want to solve by basically hitting different APIs within the enterprise or different database access, or it might be something as simple as actually searching the web. So that is the uber popular thing you see coming out of Silicon Valley at this moment, is called deep research, right?
Mhm.
The idea that you can say, hey, I want this agent to run off for 30 minutes and search the internet to all its little nooks and crannies, and then come back and build me a report about what
Mhm.
it found, based on the question that I've asked.
Mhm.
And so can you imagine that deep research thing that's not searching the entire internet, but searching my entire enterprise?
Mhm.
It'd be a massive win. If I'm an executive in this enterprise and my question is, I work for a large multinational conglomerate that basically has multiple manufacturing capabilities and supply chain capabilities, I need to know, do we have enough input for our different manufacturers? Is the supply chain moving quickly enough, or is there a bottleneck? Are we actually shipping product fast enough to actually generate revenue fast enough? Or where are the problems in that, end-to-end supply chain, right? Going, what comes in and what goes out. Being able to query your entire enterprise, asking it questions, could be
Yeah,
very,
but
very
this is more
powerful.
an analyst. Yeah, it's like a trend analysis. What can happen and so forth. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, but all the use cases, my use cases came because what I observed, when we managed to have a direct link to the business department, magic happened. So I remember a project, and it was an insurance project, also Java, of course. But what they did, they used a Bolland product back then, which allowed, this was like, it looked like, a tree of requirements. And what the developers did there, they had a direct link between the requirements and the source code. So there was a direct traceability. Every requirement, there was one Java methods which implemented the requirement, and developers were happy. But the cool story was, uh, it worked that well that developers could verify whether the idea from business department can work or not. This was insurance, those were the calculations. So the business department misused the developers to verify whether the algorithms are actually working, and this was the added value. So they were faster, to iterate than to analyze the use case. So, and I tried. This was years ago. It has nothing to do with LLMs, but I observed that. I was like, this is actually the first time that I see the traceability. In all other projects, with the UML, whatever, it was like this was like dreaming about such a thing. And this was, and in another project, there were actually Java beginners, RPG developers, and they just like Java, and I helped them, to implement a new system. It was a finance system, and I said, okay, no way that we will write unit tests together. I mean, this will never fly. And what we did is we use Excel as input.
Mm-hmm.
We parsed Excel, and we got the sheets from the finance department, and we row by row we parse the Excel, invoke our system, and saw whether the calculations are okay. If they were not okay, we colored the cells red, green was okay, and yellow was exception. And this was a huge impact. Everyone was happy with the system, and they could maintain the system without me, because this was simple Java code. If it compiled, and if all the sheets went through, then we were done. Basically, this was the definition of done. And with LLMs, we can go one step further. So this is why I'm thinking, how to integrate better or empower the business people, and combine it with backends, right?
In the case of your Excel example, was that using Poi, Apache Poi, or some
Yes,
other
yeah,
library?
Apache Poi.
Okay.
Back then was Apache Poi, and we hit even the limit of 65,000 rows, I think. So we had to use the XML POI. So this was it was Apache POI.
Because we, even with the Jerules project, which it supports decision tables, and the decision tables being edited within Excel, or you can do a CSV file also, but with Excel, that was a massive win because immediately the development team could communicate with the business team. Here are the rules that get executed. Are these the rules you want? Do we got all the rules, or are we missing some rules? Or here are the answers to those rules. So any kind of tool that helps the engineering team communicate with the business side of the house is always a win. And so I do look at the large language models from that perspective too. If it's unstructured, that's a semi-structured thing. Excel is a semi-structured, if not fairly structured in that case. But what happens when the input is truly unstructured? Just some random musings, but in there someplace is a business rule or a business process or a request.
Speaking of that, so you mentioned it already. You say, what happens if we now launch this deep research and within an enterprise? And what can happen from the enterprise architecture is that, remember microservices, we have lots of applications, legacy Java applications with REST APIs or Java APIs, it doesn't matter. But if you try to invoke, two microservices in a row, it is unstructured data because, the output from one microservice is not compatible with the input of the another one. This is where, in the SOA, there was the mappings, the attempts that we map, which was hard to maintain.
We used to call it. Transformation.
Yeah.
Everyone needs transformation.
Transformation, just to transform it. Then we had so many arrows that no one saw what happens actually. But with LLMs, it could work because what we could say is we have like integration points or integration apps, and within there's an LLM, and the LLM could consider these microservices as tools. And for the listeners, what a tool is an inversion of control. What happened behind the scenes is the microservices expose an open API description, so the LLM understands what to call, and if the LLM considers that he has nothing about this or too little about a specific area, it can decide to call the tool, and it never calls the tool directly. Rather than it creates a message, and LangChain4j or Quarkus will do it for you. So for you, it looks like LLM calls something, but behind the scenes, the LangChain4j would call the LLM. This is tools or functions, right? Tools or functions. This is by the way, in the LLM area, everything has a strange names because they are not software developers, right? This is like, you will call it maybe dependency injection or inversion of control, or and this is, everything comes with a little bit strange name, right? In the LLM area.
I think that's definitely true. And there are definitely words that those folks use on that side of the house because they come from a data science background in many cases and not from a software engineering perspective. And so, the terminology can be unusual. Like even when you engage retrieval augmented generation as an example, right? The concept of vectors and embeddings. It's like, I still struggle with, why do we call it embeddings?
Hash code.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what can also happen in code interpreter is also interesting. So that we say, okay, the LLM could decide to generate code.
Yep.
And such code could be validated. And then there are no more hallucination because after the validation, it is bulletproof, right? So
well, it depends on if it depends on if the test cases are good enough, right? So
exactly,
if you look at that deep research type model, there's a bunch of Python-based agentic frameworks out there. I mean, there are tons of them. There's a new one every weekend. So small agents, Pedantic AI, AutoGen, Crew AI. I've been messing with a lot of them actually recently because I want to understand how they work. And what they have is the ability for you to express your desire. Like, I would like to know this interesting question, answers to this. And what they do is it will go out and search the internet and try to, use DuckDuckGo or some other technology, another API to try to gather that information. It'll try to do some spidering and web crawling of the page to find some of the data on that page. And often it'll actually generate a piece of code, either the code to actually spider that page better, or at least if you get answers back, like the one question you see coming out of some of the question I've been using and the question you see in some examples is, how many seconds would it take for a leopard to sprint down the Pont des Arts, right? The bridge, the famous bridge in Paris. How long would it take a leopard to cross it, kind of thing? Well, you have to figure out the length of the bridge. You got to figure out the speed of the leopard. You got to convert that in meters to second and come up with the number of seconds. So in many cases, you use code generation for that. Right. So in other words, I gather some data. I think I also can loop to see if it's really the right data. Is it really the length of the bridge? Is it really the top speed of the leopard? I can iterate on that. And then I have to say, well, let's do the math now, right? I have the top speed of the leopard in kilometers per second, kilometers per hour. I've got the length of the bridge in meters. Do some quick code generation, validate that code. In that case, I do have some good test cases because I know I want the math to execute. And then execute that bit of math and a bit of dynamically generated code, and then spit out the answer, right? Here's the answer, Mr. Misuser. So I've been looking at use cases like that you see coming out of these agentic frameworks that's pretty interesting because Google won't give you the answer, right? Because, well, Gemini does, but not traditional Google. Unless there was a blog posting someplace that answered that question, Google, the search engine, can't find the answer. But a large language model with a bit of reasoning capability, and that's why the reasoning models are so exciting right now, coming out of Gemini, coming out of ChatGPT, Deep Research, Quinn, etc., where it can actually do a little bit of planning on its own. It can basically say, well, how would I solve this problem? Oh, I need to search for this on the internet. I need to search for that on the internet. I need good results. I might need to generate a little bit of code. Those kinds of use cases, I think, are becoming incredibly interesting and could have profound impact on how we design enterprise systems in the future. Right. Again, if you think of that sales executive that wants to ask a question of the entire enterprise.
Are you aware, or do you still remember the RDF, Resource Description Framework, back then?
Yes, I remember the terminology. I've never spent much time on it. The whole idea of was that related, of course, into the semantic web era?
Yeah, exactly. And this was back then was the idea of of intelligence on the web. It was more like Neo4j kind of idea. So this is like we have a graph database and you are linking concepts. So what I think is what could work is because the scraping of the internet is a little bit dangerous because we still don't know how good the numbers are. But if we had a canonical resource like MediaWiki from Wikipedia, for instance, there is a MediaWiki is like, the knowledge graph of Wikipedia, and expose this to LLMs, to deep research. Now we are talking because what can only happen that the LLM confuses the animal leopard with the German tank leopard. I think this is the name. I don't even know, or a vehicle leopard or whatever it is, a bicycle leopard. But this is the canonical knowledge, because scraping the internet and generating code, we still cannot rely on it.
Totally.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
Well, it's what's funny about it though. It's taking advantage of the non-deterministic nature of large language models and wrapping it with enough capability so that it can creatively pursue, just like a human would pursue an answer to a question, right? And so I actually found that example to be very fascinating. And I've been playing with that example that came out of the small agents world and actually been applying it to like AutoGen and Crew AI and LangGraph, in this case, not LangChain, but LangGraph, just trying the different agentic frameworks to see how you would go about solving that kind of riddle. And just trying different things on my own, like including just writing my own tool invoker. So instead of letting LangChain4j do the tool invocation for me, what does that look like in raw code? Well, it's actually pretty straightforward. If you go to the OpenAI API, it'll tell you, it's basically, here's the JSON blob that defines the definition of the tool. And when we basically, and how it responds when it says we think the tool should be invoked. And then basically once it invokes the tool, right, or tells you to invoke the tool, you of course invoke it, but then you take the results of that tool and pack it back into the message and send it back to the large language model. So you're actually making 2 LLM calls with a tool call.
Yeah.
Right. But I don't think a lot of people know that if they're using the higher level frameworks.
I even played with the Llama 3B, the small one, and with Llama 3 Java is a small Java class, actually, one Java class, which is able to execute the Llama 3 Java. And in the recent Java user group, what I did is I just asked, the Llama model and to provide tool support. And I say, if I ask a question, respond with a JSON, and this is the input to this Java method. And it worked, right? So I picked the JSON, invoked my method, and then provided the result, and it was like handmade, tool. So it just works, right?
But did it work every time you tested it?
It is surprising. This with the structured output, for instance, or Llama, I have less experience, but Claude, it worked all the time.
Okay.
So the structured output on Claude 3.5, I use it for 1 year, I think, the Sonnet. I have the direct access and AWS Bedrock access.
Uh-huh.
and it works all the time. So there was no single, and I use it a lot. So there was no single time that it was not JSON or parsing, except for whatever. But what often happens is, of course, throttling, right? So I pay for the API, but still there's throttling. 429, it happens frequently, right?
So, but what we talked about earlier, though, that I think is so interesting in this space is if you use the biggest, smartest models, the thing tends to work every day, today, tomorrow, and the next day, right? The tool invocation, the answer to the question, whatever it might be. But if you try to be model portable, and more importantly, if you try to be model portable and model server portable. So in other words, I don't want to just use Claude. I also want to use Ollama with this smaller model, the 70B model or 32B model or 70 model. Or I want to use VLLM, right, which is another popular model server. And I want to use this 14B model or this 7B model. Anytime you switch any of those components, it's very, very likely, if not guaranteed, your app will no longer work as you expect it to.
Yeah, and even worse. Even the same model on the same provider behaves differently over time.
Yes.
So my impression is, my impression is that Anthropic and OpenAI, what they do, they optimize the models and they make them more efficient and maybe even to save hardware, and they turn off some GPUs because over time they became not as smart as at the beginning.
Right.
And this was
So that additional non-determinism.
Exactly.
Right. Now changes the game yet again. Like, how do I build test cases to help me know if I'm, where my regressions are?
Yeah.
And that's tricky, right? Because traditional JUnit doesn't necessarily deal with, this completely non-deterministic responses unless you actually write the appropriate code around it. Like, again, looking for structured output. Did I get a JSON parsing error? There's some additional things you have to do that's unlike calling a traditional API. And then there's also additional observability tools. Like, how do you might see it if you're in your IDE, or you might see it in the CI, but how do you know it's not happening in production, right? So in production, it could actually be breaking, but you don't even know. It could be hallucinating the parameter call to that tool, but you don't even know unless you have really brilliant observability tools that are helping you discover that hallucination at production time, runtime.
And what I also try to do, I try to use the LLMs all the time for coding. And my observation is, regardless, the best one is Claude now. Sonnet 3.5 is my experience, is the best model, which I used various models. But the more challenging the code gets and the use cases get, the more they hallucinate.
Yes.
So trivial stuff, I don't care. They generate code, is fine. But if I push the limits, right, I do something really new, there is hallucination all the time, and sometimes hallucination in a loop, right? They suggest a method which sounds nice, and I say, I already know this method doesn't exist. So they suggest something different which doesn't work. So I go, this doesn't work. And sometimes they come full circle back and suggest the method again, and then I say, you already said, and then either I'm out of context, or they apologize, then it's not possible. So it's still valuable, but in production, it is going really to be hard, to also have, corner cases. So what I think is right now is like a hybrid model, support for users, user support, hybrid model, or what you said, when the data is unstructured anyway. So if you have an email, right, even if the LLM is perfect, it's not like the entire information, like the email is self-contained. Because it is written by user, sometimes the information is missing. So even a perfect model without hallucination cannot just know what the user meant. In such a case, I think it is absolutely okay to use LLM to route the email to the proper business department, right? Because fully automatic, and because nothing can go wrong. And this works surprisingly well. There's still added value because if even a human will read it, they can misread something or misunderstand this. Even the support cases, right? So classify support cases, for instance. This is a perfect case for LLM, even with hallucination.
You know what's funny about that use case, though? And maybe this is the way I work. Maybe no other human works this way, but I probably every day, at least once a day, send an email out to a bunch of people within Red Hat asking a question because it's something I just don't know. Or going on Slack and asking a question. Or somebody emailing me, hey, Bird, do you know something about this topic? Well, what if we could short circuit some of that In other words, the knowledge is actually buried in old email archives already. In many cases, the question's been asked before. It's in a Slack archive, it's an email archive, or it's at least in the knowledge of that salesperson, that engineer, that customer service rep, you know. And if we could find a way to basically short circuit that so that the answers come back faster, but they're all unstructured, right? It's just a question in someone's head. You know, I think we could actually solve a lot of enterprise use cases and, of course, make people more productive.
Yeah, with that, absolutely. Classification of, you know, Jira issues and even, you know, triaging or assigning issues to people, for instance, right? So if there's a new Quarkus case and something with JAX-RS says, okay, this is the teams, it can happen automatically behind the scenes, for instance.
Oh, I had one customer ask me today. They said, "Look, we know the knowledge is actually in Confluence and SharePoint in this corporation, but how do we get to it?" So, you know, but again, those are problems you ignored as a traditional developer because there was no answer. Well, now maybe there is an answer with these large language models where we might be able to parse the question and the various data sources and come up with answers creatively provide answers.
But in this case, I think it's even more interesting because if human will completely take over, let's say we will assign an army of business people to understanding, you know, of the of Jira and the how it's called, the portal, Microsoft portal you mentioned, SharePoint, exactly, SharePoint. Humans will hallucinate as well. So if you read email, how often you misread something or you think you read something which is not there. This is completely natural. So in such particular cases, I was just absolutely okay that LLM will take over because they will even hallucinate less, I guess, right?
Well, more importantly, you can have an automated quality assurance agent, right? That basically helps say, that doesn't look quite right. Let me double check it. Just like you would do with humans. In the customer service case, it's let me speak to a supervisor. I want to talk to your boss.
Yeah. And this is called judges, right? LLM judges for testing, for instance. There's LLM which quality assures the other LLMs, basically.
Yes, totally. Because they've done all sorts of studies that show that if you, again, ask a question multiple times, you get better answers. And if you ask 2 or 3 LLMs, you get better answers. If you let the LLMs debate the answers amongst themselves, you get better answers. And all these different techniques are simply multiple iterations against one model, multiple models, or the same model. So that's where this whole agent thing has been, you know, really born. It's like, well, let's just ask more than once. And if we do, we tend to get better answers.
Perfect. What didn't cover is small language models at all.
Well, a 7B model is small for some people.
Okay, you're right. But what I thought more is it worth to have your own models distilled from larger models on premise, for instance? You know,
I've been wondering about that too, and I haven't had enough hands-on time to prove that it's better or not. I use a ton of 7B, 8B models because those are the nice ones that run nicely on my laptop. And I use some 14 and 32 also because I have a slightly bigger laptop sitting beside me. 70B models really require about 150 gigs of VRAM, and I don't have a machine that's that big. 96 gigs of VRAM as far as I can go typically. So what I don't know is if you truly can get vastly better performance by distillation or some form of fine-tuning. So some people also use fine-tuning techniques. I've not seen that it actually can be better because I am trying to ignore the knowledge in the model. I want it as a natural language processor and a tool invoker and a RAG executor, right? I don't need it to be, I don't care about its internal knowledge. So, you know, where can I use the model for different things? And maybe this straight off the shelf 7B model works fine for that.
What works well, so what I tried is, like for instance, we have Claude's different models, a smaller one and a larger one. So the larger one could generate data for a specific case, like specific structure. And the smaller model, a cheaper model, is fine-tuned with the data provided by the larger model for a very specific use case. And this works well, actually. So you can say, just answer with this structured output, and the smaller model will do that, right? And the quality is higher, right?
In that case, though, were you the fine-tuning person, or whom was the fine-tuner, the person who made the fine-tuning happen?
I did it.
Okay.
And with JSON and L.
So what tool did you use for fine-tuning?
Bedrock, AWS, Bedrock.
Yeah, so they have their own built-in framework for that.
Yeah. So you can have the iterations, the steps, and you can specify which models from to where, and you need how many iterations will you have, and if you have roughly 1,000 data sets, you get some results already.
Because I'm interested in the use case of if I have all my OpenAI and Swagger definitions for my APIs, and I have really good Swagger definitions with JSON schemas, if I fine tune, would that make a model that's a better tool invoker for my APIs?
I guess so.
Or vice versa, like if I have SQL databases, I have a ton of SQL schemas, could I make a model that understands my SQL schemas better for my enterprise? When I've heard other people talk about that, they actually feel that it doesn't actually get that much better. Even though I put 300 hours into the fine-tuning effort, it doesn't get that much better.
Oh, this is what I also heard. But for me, it was just a test, and I didn't have to specify the system prompt. It was just, it was just an how to call it, an experiment, how it works. But I had a chat with company who wanted to create a code generation framework, and they fine-tuned their own models with lots of GPUs, and it was not worth. So they told me, if you just pick Claude out of the box, you get almost the same result. So it is not worth to have your own model.
Yeah, so I think that's the trade-off I see with people. They're basically like, look, we're going to have to spend, let's say 800 hours fine-tuning and human power, in addition to renting a bunch of GPUs, which might cost us another $80,000, let's say. Is the result worth it? And you have to benchmark that at the end. You have to evaluate that at the end. Is that model actually better? And in many cases, people find that, if we just use tool invocation better and RAG better, we would have better answers anyway. And that cost us nearly nothing up front. We didn't have to spend that 80 grand in GPU time and
but you will have to have a larger model. And by the way, the distillation is a specific case of fine-tuning, is not as expensive because you don't need a lot of data. So
I haven't tried a distillation yet myself.
Yeah, distillation. Fine-tuning is thousands of dollars, and the distillation is way cheaper.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Can you truly make a model specialized for your use case? But what this does tell us, though, is the average enterprise will have dozens, if not hundreds, of models. Some of them generic models, like just Llama 3.1, they get off the shelf, or Mistral or Granite, or it might also be specially distilled, fine-tuned models, right, that they have for a specific use case.
What I think what will happen is it won't matter in 1 year or two, because the models get all more efficient over time, more and more efficient, and most of the models will be open source. Even OpenAI thinks about open sourcing their model after DeepSeek. And in 2 years, we get open source model which we can run on commodity hardware. And what I also think is that models which run on CPU become more and more popular because the GPUs are way too expensive. And this is exactly the same like, Sun Microsystems back then, they had premium servers, and Intel came in. The servers were worse and slower, but cheaper, and they won. And I think the same will happen with models and CPUs. They will not be as fast and as good, but good enough for specific tasks. And we will commit on a few models, and this will be, I think.
Yeah, but that's another great hope for the fine-tuning distillation community, is can we actually take one of these bigger models and make it small enough and a proper setup for a CPU as opposed to a GPU? Yeah, it'll be interesting how this plays out over the next couple of years. There's a ton of people who are worrying about the model side and the training side, and a ton of people worrying about the post-training and inference side. And that's the part I'm more interested in anyway. How do I write code and wrap code around these things so I get better results, more reliable results?
Thank you. So I think this was a really nice conversation with you, because we spent some time thinking about what to do with LLMs in enterprise, right?
I think it's been an incredibly valuable conversation. I have a few notes I've already taken for myself for things.
Oh, perfect. And in one future session, we could even cover LangChain4j, if you like, or Quarkus. But this was already really interesting. And what we also need in show notes is, Kona Coffee Beans link to your, so this.
And it turns out my uncle is no longer running his e-commerce website right now. He had some health issues last year. And I did check on that, and so he's not operational at this moment. If it becomes operational again, I'll definitely send you a note, send you an email on that.
Oh, very good, because I promoted already this in the title. From Kona Coffee Beans to Java. This was the title of the last podcast.
At this point, you have to actually fly over there and
Yeah.
go directly to the farm. And he does have some packages, I'm sure. But I did notice he was not operating the e-commerce side as much because of personal situation.
Where people can find you on the internet?
Me, I am available on Twitter and LinkedIn as Burr Sutter, but a name like Burr Sutter, I'm easy to find. You can email me at burr@redhat.com or find me on X, Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn under my first name and last name, or Burr Sutter at Gmail, my first name and last name at Gmail. That'll find me also.
Mm-hmm.
But those are the easiest ways to find me. And, ping me multiple times because I tend not to pay attention that much. I'm typically on the keyboard trying some new things and not paying attention to all the social media.
Yeah, same here. Thank you a lot. See you next time.
Thank you so much.